Hey guys, my name is Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist and the website nomadcapitalist.com. I'm also the author of this book, which you can find on Amazon, where we talk about things like legal tax reduction, growing wealth by thinking internationally, by going offshore. And so at the request of some of the readers of the book, we've been making some videos about general personal finance concepts and how to apply the Nomad Capitalist approach to your personal finance. And so today I want to talk about the 4% rule. For those of you who aren't familiar with the 4% rule, it is a rather storied and popular financial concept where the idea is that if you have a nest egg upon retirement, you can draw down 4% of the value, adjust that value for inflation, and that you can allow your money to last for at least 30 years. They basically went back through, I think, 1926 through 1976, and they looked at a portfolio of half stocks, half bonds, and they figured, hey, under no circumstances during no period of time could you not draw down that portfolio for at least 30 years. Now, I've got 3 issues with the 4% rule. I think it's a great personal finance concept to get people thinking, but I want to throw out 3 issues that I have with it as the Nomad Capitalist. Now, the first issue is I think you're leaving money on the table. The second issue is the money may not actually last long enough. And the third issue is that it requires the markets to perform in the same way they have before, even though the world has dramatically changed. Let's go through those one by one. Are you leaving money on the table? Now, one of the things we talk about a lot at Nomad Capitalist and that we help people do is, how do I legally reduce my taxes? Particularly entrepreneurs who don't need to live in any one particular place, or freelancers, or anyone who can be location independent and choose where they want to go and choose their tax rate. If you can go from paying 40% tax to go and pay 10% tax somewhere, you can put all that money back into your portfolio and save up, so you've got a bigger nest egg when it comes time to actually draw it down. Now, that can lead you to either retire earlier or retire wealthier, or potentially both. But what happens when you have that nest egg? Chances are you are leaving a lot of money on the table if you're not doing things like investing overseas. I know one guy whose track record last year doing some pretty vanilla stuff was over 20%. I know another guy who's making 15%, just making mezzanine capital financing in US dollars in foreign countries secured by pretty good assets. So there are deals all around the world where you can make more money. We have a separate video where I talk about high interest term deposits in foreign banks, including high interest term deposits in US dollars. And so I think that you're leaving money on the table if you're thinking, hey, I'm going to draw down 4% of the value, adjust it every year for inflation. The reality is you could potentially be parking that money in a CD, in a term deposit somewhere, and just only taking the interest or even allowing the balance to grow. So rather than drawing it down and leaving your kids, your grandkids, your family, your favorite charity with less money, you could be increasing the value of that over time through some pretty low-risk strategies that would allow you just to take the 4% or potentially grow your money faster, plus have a bigger pot of money and be able to take out more money to live on longer term if you want to increase your lifestyle. And that brings me to item number 2. Problem number 2 I have with the 4% rule is that it may not be true anymore. Some financial planners have come out and said it really should be the 3% rule now because of what's happened with interest rates, what's happened with changes in the market, and the fact that we're living longer. So a lot of people that come to me and want help, they say, you know, I'd like to sell my business and I'd like to retire at age 45. The 4% rule may not work for them, let alone the fact that it may not work for the average person who's going to work until they're 65 or 67. Imagine if you want to retire early. You know, how do you do that? It becomes a lot more difficult, especially if you are used to a more lavish lifestyle in the years when you were running a business. You know, how are you going to keep that going, considering that you are living longer? And so, again, I think that tax is, really a big issue with this part. Potentially, the things that you're investing in are causing unnecessary tax issues. But the reality is you need a bigger pot to operate from, and you need to be able to generate higher returns. If this 4% strategy relies on a system that may not work anymore, so you may not be able to actually take the money that you need, and you may have to change your lifestyle, or you may run out of money. And I think that there's a way to do it where you don't run out of money, and perhaps you actually have more money building up in retirement as you go. And so the last point that speaks to all of this is that markets have changed. This is a approach that was built, like I said, in the 70s. And they did go through, they went through, I think, around the turn of the century, and they continue to work it out, and they continue to apply. It's only been more recently that they've said, okay, let's maybe make it a 3% rule. But how have markets changed? Not only are we living longer, but look at what was happening even 10 years ago, let alone 30, 40 years ago. Where was China? Where were all these emerging markets? Where were all these things? When I started with a partner of mine, a financial services business in the US, almost 10 years ago now, it was during the blood in the streets era, where people were coming in and saying, I had a portfolio that someone told me was the most diversified portfolio you could have, and only in the case of an apocalypse would it fall, and here I am, I lost 40% of my money. So the idea of having 50% stocks, 50% bonds, and presumably doing this in your home country, perhaps that's the United States, not only are you going to have potentially some tax ramifications doing that could be avoided by using certain strategies. Not only are you reducing those gains every single year by paying more tax than you necessarily have to, but you also may be investing in a situation where you're just not getting the returns. What happens if those markets do very poorly? What if there's a crash? What if there's a bubble? I'm not a doom and gloom guy. I'm not here to give you investment advice. But what I am saying is, if you're following the old school approach of just put it in some bonds, what happens in today's interest rate environment to your bonds? So I think there needs to be a change in the core fundamental approach of what is considered low risk. To me, I think keeping money in strong and stable banks and just letting it sit there, as we talked about in my CD laddering video, to me that seems lower risk than putting all my money in the US equities market. I'm not saying that's what you should do. I'm not here to give you investment advice. But what I am saying is I think there are some cracks in the 4% rule. And more importantly, I think that like so many other things we talk about in the book, here on our channel, on nomadcapitalist.com, there are ways to improve it if you do our 5 magic words, go where you're treated best. If you can optimize for tax, both on the pot going in, if you can optimize for tax every year, if you can be in markets that generate better returns, and if you can keep your lifestyle and make sure that you can live longer, to me, that's a win. And so with so many things these days, the United States, Australia, the UK, these may not be the places where you want to be. There may be better options out there that allow you to live longer, live a better lifestyle, have less risk, and adapt to the changing world. What happened in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s is no longer the case. And in today's globalized world, I think we need a globalized take on some of these personal finance concepts, or else we're going to be falling in the same trap that all these financial advisors are talking about, which is ever lowering of your expectations and your lifestyle. Now, we talk about a lot of ways to live the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle here on our channel, so before you go, definitely click the subscribe button and leave a comment. What do you think about all this? I'd like to hear your honest feedback. If you're new to all this and you want to figure out, what's he talking about, offshore and nomad, go on Amazon, get the book. We cover an entry-level perspective that gives you a lot of depth. If you are someone who's been watching our stuff for a while, head on over to nomadcapitalist.com, where we dig into a lot more meaty stuff, and you can even get some help of your own.